When I collapsed in the middle of my shift at the grocery store, I assumed the fear in the nurse's eyes reflected the urgency of my condition. But the real shock came when they dialed the emergency contact, my only son, and he never answered. Hours later, while attached to IVs and machines, I watched his wife post pictures of their perfect day, mocking my absence as if my pain were entertainment. I swallowed hurt and humiliation in silence, but I didn't forget. Because 3 days later, when their world fell apart and they needed me desperately, they learned exactly what silence feels like. My name is Margaret Ellison, I'm 74, and I never thought my greatest heartbreak wouldn't come from illness, but from the silence of the very child I raised. I was stocking shelves on a cold Tuesday morning when dizziness swept through me, and the floor rushed up faster than I could process. Coworkers shouted, customers panicked, and an ambulance siren became the soundtrack of my confusion. Lying in the emergency room, surrounded by strangers and wires, I clung to the belief that family would rush to my side. But as nurses checked my vitals and dialed my emergency contact, hope began to unravel. His phone rang, and rang, and rang. She remembered flashes more than details, voices calling her name, fluorescent lights spinning, and hands trying to keep her conscious. The store manager, usually stern, held her coat with unexpected gentleness while paramedics lifted her onto the stretcher. The world blurred between pain and embarrassment. She hated causing a scene. As the ambulance doors closed, all she could think about was how quickly life could change. One moment she was stocking cereal boxes, the next she was a patient. The fear wasn't just medical, it was emotional. She wanted comfort, reassurance, and a familiar voice saying, "I'm here." But fear turned into something darker, doubt, hours blurred into tests, EKGs, blood draws, CT scans. Doctors spoke in calm tones but avoided absolutes, and that made anxiety worse. She listened to medical jargon through the fog of sedatives, catching fragments like possible stroke, dehydration, and overnight observation. Nurses adjusted IV lines while checking monitors that beeped steadily but ominously. She stared at ceiling tiles, thinking of birthdays she celebrated, homework she helped with, sleepless nights spent nursing fevers, all memories tied to motherhood. The irony was sharp. She had spent decades caring for others, yet now she lay alone. Machines monitored her heart. No one monitored her feelings. The nurse approached with her clipboard, reassuring her that her son would be notified immediately. She clutched that expectation like a lifeline, but when the nurse returned, her expression had shifted. "No answer," she said gently. They tried again and again. Voicemail, text, no return call. Hours passed. Visiting hours ended. The hospital quieted. She listened to other patients receiving visitors, flowers delivered, hands held, tears wiped away. She tried to justify his absence, maybe work, maybe traffic, maybe a dead battery. But with each unanswered ring, excuses crumbled. It wasn't a circumstance, it was a choice. And the silence grew louder than machines. Scrolling her phone for distraction, she didn't expect humiliation. She saw a notification and opened it instinctively. There it was, a family photo posted by her daughter-in-law, smiling broadly at a restaurant, captioned, "Perfect day without the drama queen." She stared at the words, disbelief morphing into pain. They knew she was hospitalized. They chose to mock, not check, not care. Comments poured in, inside jokes, laughing emojis, friends praising their freedom. It wasn't just neglect, it was cruel. She felt invisible, disposable. Lying in a hospital bed with monitors beeping, she realized her suffering was entertainment to them. The next morning, the first visitor wasn't blood. It was a coworker from the store, an older woman who brought socks, snacks, and a handwritten card signed by the entire shift. Another coworker offered to feed her cat, and the store manager arranged medical leave paperwork. They weren't obligated. They simply cared. Their presence contrasted painfully with her son's absence. It was humbling to see strangers act like family while family acted like strangers. She laughed weakly at their jokes, grateful for kindness without obligation. But beneath that gratitude was a quiet ache. Why did compassion come from outsiders? She could have called. She could have confronted. She could have begged for attention. But lying in that bed, with bruised pride and an IV in her arm, she made a decision. Silence would speak louder than anger. If they saw her as a burden, she would stop carrying their expectations. Silence became her boundary, not to punish, but to protect. She focused on recovery and plans rather than pleading for affection. She didn't know what awaited her outside the hospital doors, but she knew one thing: she would never again chase people who flaunted her pain. Her collapse woke more than her body. It woke her resolve. The doctor entered with a clipboard and the kind of expression that softened his words but not their weight. He explained that the collapse wasn't random, it was a warning. Elevated blood pressure, exhaustion, and untreated stress had pushed her body beyond its limit. He urged her to slow down, reduce exertion, and prioritize rest. She nodded politely, but shame gnawed at her. She worked long hours because she had no financial support from the very son she once sacrificed for. The doctor mentioned follow-ups and lifestyle changes, but the most striking advice was simple: you need a support system. She didn't admit she didn't have one. The truth throbbed under her silence. Word of her hospitalization spread, not because her son announced it, but because coworkers and neighbors did. People asked where he was, why he hadn't visited, and their shock became whispers. The absence, once private humiliation, became public reality. Some assumed he lived far away until they learned he was minutes from the hospital. Others speculated family estrangement. The truth was worse: he simply didn't care enough to come. She overheard nurses discussing the situation in hushed tones, both pitying and incredulous. The hollowness she felt wasn't just abandonment, it was witnessing strangers recognize neglect that she had excused for years. The online mockery didn't stop, it intensified. Another photo appeared, this time of a shopping trip, with a caption reading, "Self-care day, no drama today," accompanied by laughing emojis. Friends responded with more jokes, oblivious to the cruelty. She wondered if they even knew she was in a hospital bed. The comments weren't just insults, they were dismissal of her humanity. She had read about online bullying, but she never expected to be its subject, especially from family. Each notification cut deeper than any medical procedure. The cast on her wrist stabilized a fracture. Nothing stabilized the emotional break. She closed the app, realizing some wounds heal slower than bones. Leaving the hospital meant returning to unpaid bills and reduced income. Sick leave didn't cover everything, and retirement wasn't an option. Her son's family had relied on her small contributions for years. Now, with silence between them, those expenses shifted entirely onto her shoulders. She skipped medications to stretch the budget and cut groceries to essentials. Rent, utilities, and medical copays loomed. For the first time, she fully grasped how much she had propped up her son's lifestyle. Dependence flowed only one way. The realization was bitter. She had been financing their comfort while sacrificing her health. She didn't announce her withdrawal. She simply stopped. No more paying for their groceries, childcare emergencies, or weekend outings. Auto payments she once set up were quietly canceled. Her son didn't notice at first, because entitlement blinds the entitled. But when bills appeared, when daycare fees went unpaid, when utility shut-off notices arrived, the silence became costly. She didn't gloat, she didn't warn me. She simply redirected her limited energy and finances toward recovery. She had been a safety net for years. Now the net was gone, and she realized they never once looked down to see who held them. While her son remained silent, others filled the void. A neighbor offered rides to appointments. A cashier from work dropped off soup. The librarian delivered books to distract her during recovery. Compassion arrived from unexpected corners, from people with no obligation and no shared blood. Their kindness illuminated a painful truth. Family is sometimes defined more by choice than relation. She began to reassess loyalty, not by birthright, but by action. The world she assumed was small suddenly expanded, revealing support she never anticipated, and it made the absence of her son's care even sharper. During a follow-up visit, a social worker sat beside her and spoke gently about boundaries, burnout, and elder neglect. She explained legal rights, financial protections, and support programs for seniors shouldering responsibilities alone. She asked blunt questions. Who advocates for you? Who makes decisions if you cannot? For the first time, she considered her own vulnerability, not just physical but legal. The social worker urged her to review power of attorney and wills, emphasizing independence over dependence. The conversation didn't feel cold, it felt freeing. She realized she didn't need to confront her son. She needed to prioritize herself. And that shift was the first step toward change. When the hospital requested her insurance documents, she sifted through files she hadn't touched in years. That's when she noticed the line she once overlooked. Her son was listed as her medical power of attorney. The realization hit her harder than the collapse. If she had been unconscious longer, he would have legally decided on her treatment. And considering he ignored the hospital's call, that authority could have cost her life. For years, she thought her trust was practical, even loving. Now it felt reckless. The paperwork didn't just reveal a name. It revealed how deeply she'd given power to someone who didn't value it, or her. Armed with clarity, she booked an appointment with a legal clerk at the hospital. It was surprisingly straightforward: revoke, reassign, notarize. She selected a trusted niece instead, someone who had shown up with soup and patience rather than excuses and mockery. The clerk explained the consequences, and she listened, steady and resolved. This wasn't retaliation, it was self-preservation. The pen didn't shake as she signed. For the first time in years, she took back control of her life, literally. When the final stamp landed on the form, she felt something unfamiliar, safety not tied to hope but to action. She contacted an attorney specializing in elder affairs. The consultation was calm but eye-opening. They reviewed her finances, assets, and legal vulnerabilities. The attorney asked blunt questions. Did she want her son handling her estate? Would she trust him with her final wishes? Her silence answered. She learned options she never knew existed: trusts, beneficiaries, conditional clauses. The attorney didn't judge. They are simply empowered. By the time she left the office, she understood the difference between sentiment and security. Sentiment had protected her son. Security had to protect her. And she finally chose the latter. Rewriting her will was emotional but necessary. Instead of default inheritance, she redirected savings toward people and causes that had shown compassion: a scholarship fund at the local school, small bequests to neighbors, and support for a senior outreach program. She removed her son completely, not out of spite but logic. Leaving her estate to someone who viewed her as drama would only prolong disrespect after death. She added a letter of intent, explaining her decision without venom, just truth. The weight she felt wasn't guilt. It was liberation. She wasn't erasing family. She was redefining legacy. Ironically, while she rebuilt stability, he began to crack. His company announced layoffs and his department was hit hard. Suddenly, the man who mocked her from a restaurant booth now faced financial insecurity. Calls to her phone went unanswered because she had silenced notifications. She didn't know about his struggles until a mutual acquaintance mentioned his panic about mortgage payments and childcare costs. For years, she had been the safety net. Without her, every missed payment and overdue notice tightened pressure. It wasn't karma, it was a consequence. Entitlement without support collapses quickly. 3 days after leaving the hospital, she woke to a phone vibrating relentlessly. 83 missed calls, dozens of texts, and finally one message that stood out. "Mom, we need you urgently. Answer now." The same man who couldn't pick up once during her crisis was now demanding attention. Panic laced his words: childcare emergency, unpaid bills, something about his wife being overwhelmed. She stared at the screen, remembering the caption: "Perfect day without the drama queen." Perfect didn't age well. She put the phone down, letting silence answer for her. For once, silence protected her, not them. Her decision didn't come from revenge, it came from clarity. Responding would reopen the cycle: neglect, mockery, need, dependence. She recognized the pattern and refused to step into it. She left the phone face down on the table, turned off notifications, and walked outside to feel the sun on her face. She realized she did not owe access to people who weaponized her vulnerability. Silence, once painful, now felt powerful. She chose herself, not cruelty but boundary. And for the first time in decades, she didn't feel guilty for saying no. She felt free. The bills that used to be cushioned by her quiet contributions now arrived in full force. Mortgage notices turned red, grocery budgets shrank, and overdue daycare payments piled up. Her son, once dismissive of her drama, suddenly discovered how expensive adulthood was without a silent benefactor. His wife, accustomed to brunch outings and online shopping, began selling luxury items she once flaunted. Their social media went from glamorous outings to excuses and apologies. The silence they had mocked was now costing them stability. Their financial downfall wasn't dramatic, it was incremental, the slow realization that they had built comfort on a foundation they never respected. As responsibilities mounted, childcare became their biggest crisis. The daycare threatened expulsion due to unpaid fees, and friends stopped volunteering once favors weren't reciprocated. The couple had leaned heavily on her for years: school pickups, emergency babysitting, weekend activities, without recognizing the value. Now, without her support, they juggled work schedules chaotically. She received messages begging for just a few hours or one weekend, cushed as if they were granting her an honor, not asking a favor. She remembered hospital beeps, unanswered calls, and mocking captions. The contrast was stark: when she needed them, silence; when they needed her, desperation. Their tone shifted from demanding to pleading, then guilting, then accusing. They called her cold, unforgiving, and even selfish, hoping shame would bend her resolve. They brought up her past sacrifices as if she owed them continuation, ignoring the cost of those sacrifices on her health. She recognized manipulation because she had endured it for years. This time, she didn't justify or defend, she simply didn't respond. She realized emotional blackmail only works when you fear losing the relationship. She had already lost it the moment they laughed at her hospital bed. Boundaries became her language. Silence, her protection. The couple attempted to hide their struggles, but desperation seeped through. Friends saw them decline invitations, cancel playdates, and scramble for babysitters. When someone asked casually how his mother was, the awkward pause exposed more than words could. Their carefully curated image of independence fractured. Rumors spread, not maliciously, but inevitably, about neglecting her during hospitalization and now expecting her to rescue them. The narrative shifted. Those who once admired their confidence now saw entitlement. Sympathy drifted, not toward them, but toward the woman they had mocked. Their downfall wasn't public humiliation. It was a public realization. When their youngest child experienced a severe asthma attack, panic erupted. They rushed to the hospital, only to be confronted with forms requiring medical authorization. In the past, she had handled emergencies, insurance information, and decisions. Now, the absence of support has become glaring. They tried calling her again and again, but she remained unreachable. Sitting in the waiting room, anxiety replaced arrogance. For the first time, they understood what it felt like to need someone and be met with silence. Their fear wasn't punishment, it was perspective. The roles they once dismissed now demanded acknowledgement. As paperwork complications grew, a nurse explained the need for authorized consent. They confidently stated she held power of attorney, only to discover the record had been updated. Her niece now held that authority. Shock rippled through them. For years, they assumed control without gratitude. Now, stripped of legal power, they confronted the consequences of neglect. Panic turned to disbelief, then anger, but anger couldn't undo signatures. The realization was sobering. The security they took for granted had been theirs by her choice, not their right. And she had chosen differently. As word spread through family and community, empathy shifted. People learned she had collapsed alone, mocked online, and ignored. Now the same couple who boasted independence sought sympathy. Their previous posts resurfaced, drama queen, laughing emojis, contrasted starkly with their newfound desperation. Neighbors expressed disappointment. Coworkers whispered. Church members withdrew support. Public backlash wasn't vengeful, it was accountability. They weren't shunned for struggling. They were criticized for cruelty. And the hardest consequence wasn't financial strain or legal loss. It was losing the public admiration they valued more than compassion itself. Because what came after wasn't revenge or forgiveness. It was clear. Like I'm asking you to subscribe, you can feel the final strike coming. That saved it. She invited her niece over for tea, not pity. They sat at the kitchen table while she explained everything, her collapse, the ignored calls, the online humiliation. The niece listened without judgment, without excuses, offering support instead of surprise. When she asked if she would accept the role of medical power of attorney, the niece didn't hesitate. It wasn't about inheritance or status. It was about trust and presence. They signed the documents together, notarized and witnessed. She felt a strange calm fill her chest. She didn't regret removing her son from the position. She regretted ever giving it to someone who only valued her when she was useful. At her attorney's office, the final revision was completed. Her son was removed from the will entirely, his name crossed out and replaced not with bitterness, but with intention. The attorney reminded her that she owed no justification to anyone, but she wrote a letter anyway, explaining her decision in clear, calm language. No insults, no accusations, just facts. Abandonment, humiliation, neglect. She didn't want revenge, she wanted fairness. Leaving her life's earnings to someone who couldn't answer a hospital call felt senseless. The disinheritance didn't erase love, it reclaimed self-respect. And legally, financially, emotionally, she was finally protected. With new clarity, she looked at her modest savings not as a legacy of obligation, but as a tool for purpose. She allocated funds toward a scholarship for single working mothers at the community college where she once volunteered. She set aside small financial gifts for neighbors and friends who had shown kindness during her recovery. Every dollar redirected away from entitlement was invested into compassion. It wasn't about punishing her son. It was about honoring those who genuinely cared. She realized legacy isn't measured by who demands, but by who deserves. And she chose to uplift the deserving. She didn't stage a confrontation. She didn't send a dramatic message. She simply blocked their numbers, removed them from emergency contacts, and informed her attorney of her decision. No contact wasn't an act of spite, it was closed. She refused to carry the burden of their cruelty any longer. She understood that absence speaks louder than arguments. Without access to her life, they could no longer manipulate her quiet nature into compliance. The silence that once hurt now became armor. She could breathe without waiting for apologies that were never coming. Peace began with distance. Months later, she was tagged again, this time not in mockery, but in an apology posted publicly. The wife's past caption mocking her hospitalization resurfaced, drawing criticism from people who once laughed along. Comment threads turned hostile, not toward her, but toward them. The couple tried to erase their digital cruelty, but screenshots live long online. They messaged her privately, begging to explain, insisting they didn't mean it. But apologies offered only after consequences are not apologies, they are regrets. Her silence remained, not as revenge, but as boundary. The internet became their mirror, reflecting what they once mocked. During a charity event, a nurse recognized her and gently asked if she was doing better. Their quiet conversation revealed the truth, that she had collapsed alone, that her son never came, and that online humiliation accompanied her recovery. Word spread not through gossip, but through empathy. People who once assumed estrangement now understood neglect. Sympathy shifted. Those who defended her son fell silent. Support gathered around her, not because she sought validation, but because truth has weight. The community didn't champion revenge, they championed respect. And in that shift, she saw justice, not legal but social. Sitting on her porch months later, she watched the sunset with a sense of quiet triumph. Not the triumphant roar of victory, but the steady hum of peace. She understood now that family is not defined by obligation. It is defined by presence, respect, and reciprocity. She mourned the relationship she once hoped for, but she did not regret letting go. Her life was calmer, safer, and free of conditional love. She chose dignity over blood ties, protection over nostalgia, peace over pain. In the end, the collapse that nearly took her life became the moment.